2029. Libya Working Group on Frontex Scrutiny has been set up to monitor these aspects related to the functioning of the border agency. The matter is extremely sensitive. We all know how it is like. And now we have our representatives, Klaas van Dicken, Lighthouse Reports, and Stefan Lutke, Der Spiegel. I will give the floor to them, and then we will be hearing from the chair of this Libya Working Group on Frontex Scrutiny, which is Roberta Metsola. But first, I understand we're having a presentation by Mr. Van Dicken and Mr. Lutke. Okay, please try to refrain to 8 minutes each so that we can catch up and have some room for the discussion. Okay, Mr. Van Dicken, are you there? You're connected? Mr. Van Dicken?
Please click the speak button.
Camera on. Mic
yes.
on. Yes, there you go.
Here. Okay. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving this opportunity. My name is Klaas van Dijken. I'm a Dutch journalist and co-director of Lighthouse Reports, a journalistic non-profit based in the Netherlands. Lighthouse Reports pioneers collaborative journalism. It pulls teams of journalists, media partners, freelancers and specialists together to investigate topics that need a team. All our investigations have a link to migration, conflict and corruption. More than a year ago, just before the COVID hit the world, all eyes were on the Greek-Turkish border after Turkey decided to cancel the deal that it had with the EU and Greece suspended the right to claim asylum. In the months after, we proved with our media partners and reported that Greek authorities were doing pushbacks at sea, on the mainland and from the islands. Frontex was and is heavily present in the Aegean, but claimed it didn't know about these pushbacks. We wanted to investigate if this could be true, because it seemed unlikely that Europe's border agency wasn't aware of these practices. We investigated how Frontex was able to see and if they were involved in the pushbacks themselves. In order to do that, we used the following methods. We tracked the movement of Frontex assets. We used coordinates and information published and provided by NGOs. We used published videos and other data that was publicly available, and we used information and footage given to us directly by asylum seekers. Frontex doesn't want to reveal which assets they are using, but based on open source information, we were able to conduct a pretty complete list of ships and aerial assets that were deployed in the Aegean at the time. And you can see that here. Ships have a transponder, and normally you can track those ships online via commercial websites like Marine Traffic. We discovered that most of the assets had their transponders off, or asked the websites not to display their movement. But some of the ships did have their transponder on, like the Portuguese vessels and the NATO ships. I will come back to that later, and I will show you the presentation also on my screen, as I understand that some of them cannot see it. We needed the information to see where Frontex assets were during the time of the pushbacks. We created a database of all reported pushbacks and plotted them on a map, together with the movement of Frontex assets, to see if Frontex was anywhere near a pushback. Based on our research, we can say that Frontex was close or directly involved in at least 7 pushbacks. To make this less abstract, I will show you how we investigated one incident, the one on June 8. We found a video, and can I see the next slide? And the following, please. Yeah. We found a video that shows how a Romanian vessel operating for Frontex blocks a boat full of people, and we were able to establish when and where this happened and what happened to the dinghy afterwards, and who else was on the scene that day. Can I go to the next one, please?
Sorry, Chair, is there a way to get the presentation a little bit bigger, because it's impossible to see, and there seems to be a double screen going on, and could we get
Sorry, maybe, does it help if I stop sharing my screen?
I think maybe yes, I don't know, but could we get it?
Is that slightly better? If we go to the next
Slightly.
one. Slightly, sorry. In the video, you can see the rubber boat full of people interacting with officers on board of the Romanian vessel. In other videos, you can see the same Romanian vessel passing by the dinghy on high speed, creating waves. This creating waves is not a standard maneuver. That was explained by a marine specialist. But you can recognize this dangerous practice from the Greek Coast Guard when they are trying to push back boats to Turkish waters. Can we go to the next slide? This video, made by the Turkish Coast Guard, shows also important information: the time and the location where it was filmed. But it doesn't show the date, but I will come back to that later. Next slide, please. The location can also be confirmed because of the landscape in the background in the video. It perfectly matches with the landscape on Google Earth. Can we go to the next slide? We know that the incident took place on June 8 because we found the same dinghy with the same people on board, look at the clothes, for example, that they are wearing, in another video. In that video, you can see that they are being approached by the Hellenic Coast Guard in another rubber boat. This action is recorded. Can we go to the next slide, please? This action is recorded by the Turkish Coast Guard that shows two things as well. The NATO ship Berlin, which has its transponder on, so we were able to track it, and can we go to the next slide? The Turkish radar screen. The radar screen matches perfectly with the signal of the transponder of the NATO ship. Which can be seen on this map, and when you put them, merge them together, you can see that it perfectly matches. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry, can we go to the next? Yes, thank you. This is what the situation looked like at 8:45 on June 8. You can see the Turkish Coast Guard, you can see the dinghy, the NATO ship, and also Frontex ship Nortada approaching the place of the pushback. Can we go to the next? We can now also say that the incident with the Romanian vessel was like this on June 8 at 5:51 a.m., so in the morning. The MI 1103 was there together with the Turkish Coast Guard, and the NATO ship Berlin was coming from the south. This is also, and if we go to the next slide, confirmed by Frontex when they shared this on their own map that was sent to their own management board. The blue triangle that you can see on the map is the Romanian vessel. And when we go to the next slide and we merge the two maps together, it perfectly matches, and our analysis of the data was right. The next slide. At 9:30, the boat with asylum seekers were pushed over the Greek borders, and as you can see, the Portuguese vessel, the Nortada, was also in the area with the equipment on board that should be able to monitor what is going on. And the next slide. At midday, you can see that the pushback was completed. And then, if we go to the next slide, I would also like to take you briefly to the Central Mediterranean, where we used part of the same methods to investigate what the activities of Frontex. This time to investigate Europe's involvement in the pullbacks to Libya and prevent people to cross the sea to ask for asylum. The EU is not allowed to send people back to Libya because it's an unsafe place. There's conflict, people are put in detention camps where people are forced to work, tortured, raped and killed. It's a place you want to flee from. The EU is also not allowed to guide or coordinate the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept asylum seekers, and it is always denied doing so, including Frontex. It only trains, support and finance the Libyan Coast Guard, they say. Frontex says they just inform the rescue coordination centers in the area when they see a boat in distress. The coordination center must then independently assess who can perform the rescue. This includes the Libyan JRCC, created with money and support from the EU. Again, we made a database of incidents, we looked at the available flight data from Frontex air surveillance planes and commercial vessels in the vicinity. And we visualized them on the map to see patterns, and we discovered the following. When Frontex airplanes flew over the boats in distress, hardly any time commercial vessels and NGO vessels were changing their course, despite that they were close to the people in distress. Instead, it was almost always the Libyan Coast Guard who came, hours later, to intercept the people, even when they were often already in the Maltese search and rescue area. Data analysis of 94 incidents on the Mediterranean shows that the Libyan Coast Guard intercepted asylum seekers 56 times, with a Frontex aircraft flying in immediate vicinity in at least 20 of these incidents. In 12 cases, Frontex was the first actor to detect the asylum seekers' boats. Despite nearby commercial ships and NGO rescue boats, there's a clear pattern where boats in distress are made to wait for interception by the Libyan Coast Guard. At least 91 people died or went missing under the watchful eye of Frontex. Through sources with Frontex and the Libyan Coast Guard, we also discovered the following. The JRCC in Libya that should coordinate the rescues independently is in fact the Libyan Coast Guard. Libyans don't see the difference, and Frontex knows there is no difference. Multiple sources told us that. But we also know that there is a direct communication between Frontex and the Libyan Coast Guard, and officials are getting messages on their phones. These two facts have a devastating impact. Rescues are delayed because the Libyan Coast Guard has a favorable position and commercial vessels or NGOs are not informed. These delays are putting lives at risk and people are being pulled back to horrible places. This system seemed to be created not to save people, as Frontex and EU claim, but to make sure that asylum seekers cannot reach Europe. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we hear from Mr. Lutke. Please try also to summarize the best you can, because we're lagging behind. We have a discussion to go through. Please, Mr. Lutke, there you go.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished members of the Parliament, thank you for the interest in our work. I'll try to be brief. After our initial publication, after our initial investigation was published in the fall of 2020, we published a series of follow-up reports, not all of them available in English, and some of them focused on one special incident, which was the incident on April 19th of 2020. This incident of an illegal pushback was documented by Frontex itself. Why do I want to focus again today on this? I think it shows very well how Frontex management and Frontex director Fabrice Leggeri knew early on about the pushbacks, and it shows how little of this available information actually ended up with the European Parliament, which, as you know, took great interest in it and actually asked about it. So let me walk you through what exactly happened on the night of April 18-19. Shortly before midnight, there was a Greek border patrol boat north of Lesbos in Greek territorial waters. It had intercepted a rubber dinghy with asylum seekers. Between 20 and 30 asylum seekers were on the rubber dinghy. A Frontex plane has observed this incident. The pictures were sent directly to the Frontex Situation Center in Warsaw. And the pilot observed in the following hours how the Greek patrol boat first was towing the empty rubber boat towards Turkish territorial waters. The people, the asylum seekers, were on the boat of the Greek patrol boat, And throughout the incident, there were several attempts by Greek authorities to redirect the Frontex surveillance airplane, which was initially denied by Frontex. The pilot thus observed that the Greek Coast Guard was putting the asylum seekers back on the flimsy rubber dinghy and continued to tow them towards Turkish territorial waters. The Frontex pilot mentioned explicitly, this is all documented in a serious incident report from Frontex, that no Turkish vessels were nearby, just Greek Coast Guard vessels. At 3:21 a.m., the Frontex plane communicated to Warsaw that the rubber boat had no engine. I repeat, no engine. That's the quote, and is adrift. The pilot also said that Greek assets were leaving the area. We spoke to different international law experts, and this all were agreeing that this is a clear violation of fundamental rights, apart from the usual considerations that you have to apply in those situations of possible pushbacks. Here it is, special circumstances are the case because the Greek Coast Guard, according to, for instance, Dana Schmalz, who is an international law expert, put people's lives at danger by placing them again on the rubber boat, which had no engine, and left them adrift. Remarkably, I might say, the officers in the Frontex Situation Center or at Frontex came to a very similar conclusion, which is written down in the serious incident report, which I believe some of you may have read or you have certainly access to. It concludes with the following sentences. The migrants were safe when they were on board of the patrol vessel and then placed back in the rubber boat, put again in a distressed situation and left adrift without means of propulsion. The engine was missing on the rubber boat when it was left adrift in the Turkish territorial waters. There is a strong belief that presented facts support an allegation of possible violation of fundamental rights or international protection obligations such as principle of non-refoulement. Those are the facts, as recorded by Frontex. What did Frontex make out of it? The incident was categorized as a Category 2 serious incident report, serious incident. It was not categorized as a Category 4, which is reserved for a possible violation of fundamental rights or international protection obligations. That meant that the Fundamental Rights Office was not involved, apart from being in CC when the serious incident report was being distributed via email. The Frontex director, Mr. Fabrice Leggeri, handled the case himself. On May 8, he wrote in a letter to the Greek Minister of Maritime Affairs. He voiced his concern, requested an internal investigation. In July, as you all know, Mr. Leggeri actually appeared in the Libya committee and was asked explicitly about alleged pushbacks because there were first reports. We all know the systematic pushback campaign. Several people have reported on this. Started in March 2020. So in July, Leggeri was asked about the alleged pushbacks. He did not mention this incident at all and said that in case of any doubt, he asked the Greek authorities. As I understand, the serious incident report was also not mentioned in a list of serious incident reports that were requested before the meeting by the European Parliament. The answer of the Greek government came on July 10, so almost 4 months after the incidents. It's a rather long letter. I believe you have access to it. The Greek government, among other things, claims that none of the asylum seekers asked for international protection, that the Greek crew in a procedure did not find any of the asylum seekers who were vulnerable, and that they were disembarked in a place of safety. Frontex then decided, finally, I am actually not sure at which point exactly, that there was no fundamental rights violation. No fundamental rights violation. So this is why, according to Frontex, the case was not further consulted also with the Fundamental Rights Office. This case, April 1819, was one of the cases that the management board in their investigation was not able to resolve. Essentially because the Greek government, the Greek Coast Guard, claims things that are contradicted by the photos shot from the Frontex airplane themselves. So the Greek Coast Guard, for instance, says the boat was seaworthy, able to navigate, equipped with a working engine. They also said the Turkish Coast Guard was at the scene and coordinated with the Greeks. This is all very implausible in my view, since the photos and observations from Frontex itself, this is why I'm telling you all this, show the opposite. The working group nonetheless considers this evidence just as credible as, you could say, the excuses by the Greek Coast Guard. For me, this illustrates the limits of the internal Frontex investigation, since it was not an independent investigation. To sum up, I think if you look at this case, there are several open questions here. Why was this incident made a Category 2 and not a Category 4 incident with the consequences that I explained? Why did Frontex Director Leggeri not inform the Parliament, although he was asked about it, and even his own officers thought that there's a strong belief that there might have been a violation of fundamental rights? I also think it illustrates quite well what one could think of the management board recommendation for Frontex to act as the eyes in the sky in the Aegean. I think the case shows quite clearly this is only useful when those kind of clear, illegal and also dangerous pushbacks are actually acted upon and not just buried. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, Roberta Metsola, which is the chair of this working group. You've got the floor to present your views, and then we will be opening discussion with the rest of the members which are listed. I am announcing that for the sake of this interpretation situation that we have gone through a number of times, please, if you can refrain when I start the list of speakers, first round 2 minutes each, and second round 1 minute each, we can make it. Otherwise, we won't. Please, Roberta.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the journalists from Lighthouse Reports and their Eagle for coming to this panel discussion of the Frontex Scrutiny Working Group to present the work that I've done. It is your work and the initial investigations that sparked the conversations and concerns leading to the establishment of the Frontex Scrutiny Working Group. This working group had a mandate of 4 months to look into allegations of Frontex's involvement in violations involving in incidents involving the violation of fundamental rights. 2 years ago, this House finalized negotiations with the Council on a new mandate for Frontex, and this was done in recognition of an accumulation of incidents at the external borders of the Union that was having a ripple effect on the integrity of our Union. Mandate also recognizes that the protection of fundamental rights is non-negotiable everywhere in our Union. So what we want from this process is to give clear answers to the questions that are being asked and look into and recommend improvements in the way things are done. The work program that we have together with input from all the colleagues that you will hear from today from across the House ensures that we will focus on different aspects, including the compliance and respect for fundamental rights, the agency's internal management, and in ensuring that the transparency and accountability standards that are expected are reached. This is our mission statement in a nutshell, and we will report back within 4 months on our findings. This means that we are currently a little bit over halfway through the mandate. This exchange with journalists has been our 5th exchanges with experts on the matter. We have also heard from Commissioner Johansson and the Executive Director of the agency, and where at that point we asked very hard and clear questions about the state of affairs. We have also heard from the Frontex Management Board that set up the working group that has been mentioned to investigate certain incidents that gave rise to allegations of fundamental rights violations. We also met with legal experts and human rights experts in order to give us more insight on what EU legislation currently mandates in this regard and into what the situation actually is on the ground. Next up is a meeting with representatives of the Coast Guards of frontline member states, who we may expect to elaborate on maritime missions involving irregular migration and vulnerable people at sea. So in conclusion, I thank again you, our panelists. I think your work is critical. There are lessons to be drawn from recent developments that have rules that go deeper than the Frontex mission launched in the Aegean. The ongoing pandemic has made it extremely difficult for our working group to conduct certain visits ourselves. However, we are going to continue putting pressure in that regard. So on behalf of the working group, I thank you very much for your work and your information. And please forward your presentations, Mr. Dijken, when possible for us to look into it in more detail. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Roberta, for your points as chair of this working group. Let's hear from the members, relevant members of the working group, which are listed. I suggest 2 minutes each, so that we can open 1 minute to the rest of the members which are listed. Please, Javier Moreno.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Y en primer lugar, sumarme al agradecimiento de la presidenta Roberta Metsola por la labor de investigación y de información muy útil para este grupo de trabajo que han llevado a cabo los periodistas, supongo en condiciones difíciles. Y como el periodista Van Dijken ha dicho, importante el respeto de derechos humanos y lo importante, Frontex, es que no devuelva los inmigrantes, sino que se establezca un protocolo de salvamento marítimo. Y que se respete el derecho internacional y el principio de non-refoulement. Frontex es una agencia importante, por eso queremos que si ha habido errores se asuman responsabilidades por parte de quien haya cometido esos errores. Y yo lo que quería preguntar a los periodistas si han sentido muchas presiones por parte, por ejemplo, de Estados miembros o incluso de Frontex a la hora de hacer su investigación, si piensan que hay una especie de protección mutua entre Frontex y los Estados miembros y que ocultan información. Si piensan que hay otros casos más recientes y si es cada vez más difícil acceder a la información, si hay una especie de protección. Y según el Management Board, que se reunió la semana pasada, parece ser que una de las medidas que quieren implementar es que se graben vídeos desde Frontex de las operaciones. Quiero conocer su opinión al respecto, sabiendo que, bueno, a ver, según quién grabe el vídeo y cómo lo grabe, pues tenemos que tener todas las garantías necesarias para saber que se respetan los derechos humanos. Muchas gracias una vez más en nombre del Grupo Socialista y Demócrata por su labor muy importante para este grupo de trabajo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Javier Moreno. Dragos Tudoraki.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I would like to start with my appreciations for the great work, great investigative journalism done by the two speakers earlier today. Paradoxically, it may sound, we shouldn't be needing your work because we have voted, as I think Roberta Metsola also said more than 2 years ago, we voted a very strong mandate for Frontex to be able to actually monitor and report on such allegations themselves. But here we are, 2 years later, still not having fundamental rights officers on the ground and still waiting for a strong, accountable, transparent reporting mechanism inside Frontex that will help us here in the Parliament get such information. Be that as it may, clearly in terms of facts, we have situations where we look at boats. You have put yourselves here in your presentations various videos and photos of boats, and we are going to try and establish here in this group of ours how to also interpret legally those factual situations. But I have two concrete questions for you. The first one is, how do you see your interaction with the future fundamental rights officers that will be deployed on the ground, because you will be continuing to do your work, and I hope you will do so. But how do you see, once the FROs will be there, how do you see yourself working with them? And the second question is, how do you perceive the reality in which the Frontex assets, and particularly the officers in those assets, are doing their work at sea? What do you think their biggest needs are in terms of how they deploy their activities in the situations that you have monitored across the work that you have done? Thank you.
Thank you, Dragos Tudoraki. It'll be ID Peter Kofod. Are you there, Peter? Not connected. Then it'll be again Greens, Kittinekestrik.
Thank you, Chair. And I would also like to thank the speakers, Mr. Lutke and Van Dijken, for their great presentations, but also for the work done by the investigative journalists. As Mr. Tudoraki also said, it enables us to do a better scrutiny, and hopefully in the end it will lead to an improvement of the performances if it comes to human rights compliance. Formally, I would like to ask you also to share your reports and your evidence with us as a working group so that we can base our work on that, including also the presentation that you give. And I would like to hear from you what Frontex has done with your report so far. Have you been heard by the agency? Has there been any communication? Has it also been reported back to you? What is the state of play regarding the 4 outstanding cases? And if it comes to the content, Mr. Lutke, you said something about the serious incidents report and how it was changed, or at least it was been put in another category. Can you give some clarification as to what is your impression of what's happening with serious incidents report directly submitted to the head office, and is there any possibility or risk that these are manipulated? I did not quite get your point there. Then where did you see a direct participation and where did you see a failure to intervene for Frontex? And do you have other indications apart from these 13 incidents that Frontex has knowledge of human rights violations in the Greek waters? Or if you happen to work in other countries in reporting on pushbacks, what you see of the role of Frontex in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke. Now it'll be ECR. I have no one listed. If I am not corrected, I will move to the left. Sira Rego, I think you are connected.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, yo quiero empezar dando las gracias en primer lugar a los periodistas por el trabajo que han hecho y haciendo un reconocimiento también. Creo que este tema en concreto pone en evidencia la importancia de la libertad de prensa, del trabajo de investigación periodística y sobre todo del derecho a una información veraz, que yo creo que es importantísimo en democracia. Así que insistir mucho en el agradecimiento por el magnífico trabajo que están haciendo y la oportunidad que nos dan también de poner el foco en un elemento tan grave que tiene que preocuparnos tanto a las instituciones europeas. Yo quisiera hacer concretamente 2 preguntas. En primer lugar, a mí me interesa, si puede ser, que nos den más detalles de cómo funcionan estas devoluciones en caliente y sobre todo cuál es la implicación y cuál es el papel que desempeña Frontex, porque da la sensación de que aquí se está intentando insertar la devolución en caliente como algo aceptable en términos de derecho. Yo creo que es importante aclarar cómo se están dando y por qué suponen una vulneración de los derechos humanos y tener ahí una información directa de todas las personas que están teniendo de alguna manera inputs de esto, pues es muy interesante y muy importante para este grupo de trabajo, para este grupo de investigación. Y en segundo lugar, insistir en un aspecto que ya han preguntado algunos de mis colegas, pero insistir en si nos pueden aclarar cuál es el papel que ha tenido la Oficina de Derechos Fundamentales, la Oficial de Derechos Fundamentales de Frontex, y cuál es la gestión concreta que ha hecho el señor Leggeri respecto al trabajo que se haya podido hacer, respecto a las aportaciones que se hayan podido hacer por parte de esta responsabilidad. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Sira. Now, let's open a second round, 1 minute each, okay? Please help us so that we may be back to our guest speakers for some further explanation. Lena Dupont, you've got the floor.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the journalists for their work and their important role in informing us and the public. But alongside with that important role comes the responsibility to also put information into the context. So my first question in this regard is, did you take into account the geopolitical context of the incidents? If so, how? Especially when we look at the incident of the 8th of June that you just mentioned, where the discussion and the conflict about the maritime border feeds into. Second question, given the complexity of the situation and the decision that needs to be taken when at sea, like we just heard in the last Frontex Scrutiny work group meeting, which criteria did you use to decide whether its inaction is a part of a border protection measures or on the other hand, a possible violation of fundamental rights? And the last question, did you take into account the latest changes within the agency and the discussion and the results thereof between the agency, the management board and the commission? as well as the results of the working group, FRALO, especially, or looking more closely, and the use of video footage by the Frontex officers themselves. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now it'll be Bettina Vollath. Bettina, bist du da?
Danke, Chair. Herzlichen Dank an die beiden Vortragenden, dass Sie heute hier sind. Ihre investigative Arbeit ist wirklich von großer Bedeutung, denn Sie haben ganz klar aufgezeigt, dass Frontex Grundrechtsverletzungen begangen hat. Wir wissen, das bewusste Wegschauen ist genauso ein Rechtsbruch wie das Selbstdurchführen von Pushbacks. Können Sie vielleicht noch mehr auf die Systematik der beobachteten Fälle eingehen? Welche Parallelen gibt es vielleicht zwischen unterschiedlichen Vorfällen? Und zu Libyen: Flüchtende Menschen dürfen nicht nach Libyen zurückgewiesen werden wegen der unmittelbaren Bedrohung durch Folter und Tod. Und um das zu umgehen, lässt Frontex das offensichtlich die Libyer machen und informiert dazu die libysche Küstenwache über Standortdaten. Das haben Sie so bestätigt. Deshalb bitte ich Sie, uns noch mehr über die von Ihnen beobachtete Zusammenarbeit zwischen Frontex und der libyschen Küstenwache zu berichten. Und ich nehme an, Sie haben auch direkt Frontex wegen dieser Vorfälle kontaktiert. Wie hat Frontex dieses Vorgehen eigentlich gerechtfertigt Ihnen gegenüber? Dankeschön.
Danke. Now it's Renew. Malik Atzmani, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Chair. I would like also to thank Mr. Van Dijk and Mr. Lütke, because they are one of the reasons why we are here, to have this Frontex Scrutiny Working Group, the allegations of the direct participation also of Frontex in pushbacks. And that was also my question to you, and it was also already asked by Tineke Strik. Do you have the feeling that there's a direct participation of Frontex, and do you have also evidence on it? Or is it more, it seems like, and it's still allegation? Because that is our task, to have these 4 months to see if there's already proof for pushbacks also directly by Frontex. Can you elaborate more on that? And also, I read also your articles, of course, and about the discussion also with the Libyan Coast Guard and Frontex. And I was curious, what's your personal opinion if a boat is in distress? Should Frontex or shouldn't Frontex contact also the Libyan Coast Guard? What's your views about that? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Eric Markhardt for the Greens.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender, und auch vielen Dank für die Berichte, die ja, wie schon gesagt wurde, auch zu unserer Arbeit sehr gut beitragen können und eigentlich auch der Anlass sind, dass wir als Parlament schauen wollen, was ist denn dran an den Vorwürfen und was passiert dort eigentlich an den Außengrenzen. Eine Anmerkung möchte ich mir schon erlauben. Ich finde es eigentlich, und das ist nicht gegen die Journalisten gerichtet, sondern ich finde es eigentlich schon beschämend, dass wir als Parlament darauf angewiesen sind, dass man investigative Journalisten in diesem Bereich braucht. Das zeigt für mich schon allein, dass das der Anlass ist, über den wir heute reden, und nicht Frontex uns selbst berichtet hat, was sie für Erkenntnisse haben, dass dort etwas falsch läuft. Ich habe eine Frage, und zwar ist das die Frage, viele andere sind, glaube ich, nicht an die Journalisten zu richten, aber die Frage, ob man denn aus den Berichten, aus den Dokumenten den Eindruck hat, dass die Situation an den Außengrenzen aufgeklärt ist. Also handelt es sich um einzelne Einzelfälle, oder kann man davon ausgehen, dass dort eben bislang nur ein kleiner Teil der Menschenrechtsverletzung überhaupt beobachtet wurde? Danke.
Okay, danke. Now it'll be Cornelia Ernst.
Ja, vielen Dank. Dank Ihrer Arbeit, muss man sagen, und der NGOs sind wir überhaupt in der Lage, hier auf den Tisch zu bekommen, die Fälle, um tatsächlich Frontex Arbeit entsprechend einschätzen zu können. Das ist wirklich, wirklich, wirklich wichtig für uns. Ich habe folgende Fragen. Sie haben ja auch sicherlich den Bericht des Management Boards gelesen mit einer gewissen großen Aufmerksamkeit, genauso wie wir. Und können Sie mal sagen, wie Sie darauf reagiert haben, auf die Schlussfolgerungen, die Frontex hier gezogen hat in Bezug auf die aufgedeckten Fälle? Und können Sie sich ernsthaft vorstellen, dass Boote von selbst umkehren, wie die griechische Küstenwache ja behauptet hatte? Und tatsächlich auch Frontex hat das ja auch nicht bestritten, sondern ja, das sei eben so. Also das wäre das Erste. Das Zweite, es gibt Muster für das Handeln von Frontex in Bezug auf die Pushbacks und die Kooperation mit der libyschen Küstenwache. Kann man sagen, also so laufen die Muster ungefähr ab, so müssen wir uns das vorstellen, wenn wir über Frontex Rolle sprechen diesbezüglich und aus wenn Sie damit unsere Arbeitsgruppe noch weiter bereichern würden. Danke.
Okay, now back to you, Mr. Van Dicken, to react after all of the points that have been made. Please.
Thank you very much for all the questions. I will try to answer most of them. I think what is important to understand on the recording and what is Frontex doing with the things that they are seeing, especially with their air assets, is they record everything. They can, and it's live broadcasted in Warsaw. Also, especially for the situation in the Central Mediterranean, they live broadcast by default also in the rescue coordination centers there. Especially Italy and Malta should be aware of what is going on. To stay a bit in the Central Mediterranean, there was a question on my personal opinion, if the Libyan Coast Guard should be informed by Frontex at all. I think if you look at the situation and you don't want to have people pulled back to Libya, you should not inform them. And if you look at the map and the data that is available, you can see that you can see that there are many commercial vessels and NGO vessels are in the area, and they should be informed as well as the rescue coordination centers in Rome and Malta. I don't think there's a need to inform the Libyan coordination center at all, and Frontex, like I said in the presentation, is aware that the coordination center that should be independent is exactly the same as the Libyan Coast Guard, and they know this. Then, on the Aegean, of course, I'm willing to share the information that we have for the presentation and the data. It's all publicly available data. We did take into account the geopolitical context, but I think when it comes to people in a rubber dinghy that is not seaworthy, and they are in the middle of the sea, you should rescue those people or take them on board, and you should not, I repeat, should not sail or pass them on high speed, creating waves. That is putting people at risk. It doesn't matter if that strait of the sea is narrower than, for example, the Central Med. If people cannot swim, or if it is 500 meters or 2 kilometers away, you will not make it, especially not women and children. So the geopolitical context doesn't really matter. And when you watch the video, you can see that the Frontex vessel, the people on board of the Frontex vessel, didn't take the time to actually speak to the people on board. So I think in this case, we prove that Frontex is directly involved in the pushbacks. And again, I can share the presentation later. We haven't looked in other countries yet on the activities in Frontex. As you can imagine, these kind of investigations do take time and a lot of money to do investigation. But if the time comes and we publish, we are again, of course, happy to share the results after we published and give more detail. And probably, but that was it for now. Stefan, over to you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Lütke, there you go to finalize this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a lot of questions, and I'll try to answer most of them or all of them. By Tineke Strik, that was the one that clearly addressed me as I explained something, and she did not get what I meant. On the April 18-19 incident, I said that this incident was categorized as a serious incident report of category 2, which has consequences for the involvement of the Fundamental Rights Office, which is less involved in those kind of incidents. I do not have any evidence that the category of the serious incident report was changed afterwards from category 4 to category 2. I just think that many of the sources that we spoke to question why this was not a category 4 in the first place, which would have involved the Fundamental Rights Office much more. And in general, I think it's an open question why this incident that Frontex has documented so well is not regarded as a fundamental rights violation. I think that was more clear, or I hope that was more clear. There was one overarching question on how do we qualify the involvement of Frontex, I believe, in the Aegean and in the pushbacks. How do we have to imagine this? So directly after the meeting of the Greek Security Council, and I believe in the end of February, beginning of March, after the Turkish Republic had stopping migrants from, for instance, coming to the Evros border, and apparently also stop them from reaching the coast and in the Aegean. The systematic pushback campaign by the Greek Coast Guard started. How is Frontex involved in that? They know about it. We know they know about it. It's obvious from internal Frontex documents. It's also obvious from the evidence that Mr. van Dijken just presented. Overall, you could say they are complicit. They know about it. They help in the sense that sometimes they stop the boats themselves and then hand them over to the Greek Coast Guard, who does the dirty job, so to say. Frontex knows what happens afterwards. Everyone knows that those people are pushed back afterwards. You can read the report. It's all out there. We published as early as June 2020 a video taken by an Afghan asylum seeker. He was sitting inside an inflatable life raft where he has been placed by the Greek Coast Guard and towed by a Greek Coast Guard ship towards Turkey. All the facts are on the table. Frontex knows what is happening. They help in the sense that they stop them, give them to the Greek Coast Guard. And I'd also have to say that there is a certain degree of complicity in the way that Frontex responded to the allegations and responded to the internal evidence that has been documented inside the Frontex Situation Center. If you read what the Frontex director says, and if you realize what he said to you in the European Parliament, I think that it's fair to say that he misled the Parliament in not letting the members of the Parliament know about the allegations or about the pushbacks themselves. So I would phrase it as complicity. Direct participation is not how I would phrase it because it's not precise. It's complicit, and they help in a very certain aspect, and in some cases, as Mr. van Dijken explained, they help they are involved directly, as in June 8. What other questions were there? I think there was one question on what happens exactly at the pushbacks by Sira Rego. I did not really understand the question very well, because I think the terms devoluciones en caliente has been translated as something else. I think she meant the pushbacks So what happens? I think it's important to understand that there are different types of pushbacks, those at the land border, at the Evros border, those in the Aegean, where people stay sort of at the water in the sea, and those where people have already, asylum seekers have already reached islands like Samos and Lesbos and are then dragged back onto the Aegean Sea and left adrift, put again in danger. All of those cases we have documented extensively, including geolocated, verified video footage, witness testimonies, and of course we are happy to share those kind of reports again with you. Since this was another question. Some more details on the maritime pushbacks. I think you have to understand that it involves a certain degree of violence. So Frontex assets or the Greek Coast Guard themselves stop the dinghies. Border guards, Greek border guards, board those dinghies. Oftentimes they are masked. Often they destroy the engine of the boat in order to stop it from approaching the islands. Sometimes they lash out at the asylum seekers with sticks, or they lash out to the boats with sticks. In several cases, for instance, the April case that I just explained, or the August 10 case, they take the people on board, and afterwards they place them on those inflatable life rafts, leave them adrift at sea, or back onto the rubber dinghies. The asylum seekers we have spoken to, of course, they say they wanted to claim asylum. No one says they didn't ask for it. Most of them report that they feared for their lives, that people on the rubber boats or even more on the inflatable life rafts, which are usually used to rescue people, were fearing for their life. And it was starting to spin, that they had no food, no water, and people started to faint. They also reported that they had no way of actually having an official decision, of course, no piece of paper, no way of remedy against it. What else was mentioned? The geopolitical context. Yes, I think we took this into account. Of course, we also reported that people on the islands call those standoffs in which the Turkish Coast Guard and the Greek Coast Guard produce both waves in order to push the asylum seekers to the other side. We reported about that. We reported there's an informal name for it. It's called water polo among the inhabitants of the islands, Greek water polo. Then I think there was another question to the extent about the cooperation between the Frontex Management Board and the Fundamental Rights Office. I think you can read most of this in our reports, of course. From the people that I spoke to, you can clearly see that they claim the now it's an ex-fundamental rights officer, the former fundamental rights officer, was essentially left out in the cold by the Frontex management and by the Frontex director in person. One official told me we felt like Legerie just bypassed the former fundamental rights officer. And various sources indicated that the way human rights violations have not been a priority in general in the Frontex management are indicated by the fact that the 40 fundamental rights monitors were not hired on time, and at the same time the position by the former fundamental rights officer was publicly advertised, thus threatening her position inside the company. Especially at a time in which she was about to gain more power with the involvement of the 40 fundamental rights monitors. I think that's it so far.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Van Dijken, and thank you, Mr. Lutke, for your most valuable contributions. They have been most appreciated, that's for sure. They have enlightened judgment of the members of the Libya Committee as to the points that we have made all the way throughout all these series of years in which we have shown concern about Frontex growing and Frontex undergoing what you might call a crisis of growth, a crisis out of its own growth as to becoming the giant agency in the constellation of agencies of the European Union, and particularly those which are to be accountable before the Libya committee. We have shown concern about the fundamental rights consideration, for sure. We have also shown concern as to how to enhance accountability of the Frontex agency, how to make it accountable for its operations to be carried out. I think we have actually done it in the foreseen schedule. So we thank you again, and Roberta Metsolas, chair of the the Frontex Scrutiny Group, would you like to have some final comment? Would you care for it or not? Roberta, you there? Yes.
Very briefly, Chair, to thank once again our colleagues and the journalists who really expressed and answered so comprehensively. I was also, let's say, interested in hearing the aspects to do with the internal aspects and also what is happening in the central Mediterranean. I'd also like to confirm that we are not questioning the status of the agency, but rather we are looking and investigating all allegations, all investigations that has been looked into, reported to in our very own way, with a very good consensus-led process between all the political groups. So once again, thank you, and I ask our colleagues to send us the presentation that was included at the beginning of this debate, because that will certainly help as we go into further details that were referred to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roberta. And thank you all for your contributions. For these ones, we didn't have to apply for a special indulgence of our interpretation cabin. We thank you all. See you. And just a final comment, as the usual any other business, the point is that we are to remind you that the second voting session will be taking place tomorrow, May the 11th, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. via the so-called European Parliament vote. Opening and closing the voting sessions will be done via email, okay? And next meeting is to be held May the 25th. But tomorrow we're having the trialogue of the certificate. Thank you all. Bye now.